Chicago, August 1992. The summer air hung heavy with anticipation as 65,000 people packed Soldier Field to absolute capacity. The Dangerous World Tour had been building momentum across continents, but tonight was different. Chicago had always held a special place in Michael Jackson's heart, the city where the Jackson 5 had first tasted real success, where Berry Gordy had taken a chance on 5 boys from Gary, Indiana. The massive stadium had fallen into complete darkness 15 minutes ago, the kind of darkness that makes strangers reach for each other in shared excitement. Occasional lighters flickered throughout the stadium like earthbound stars, swaying to the rhythm of collective anticipation. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, their eyes wide with wonder, waiting for a glimpse of the king of pop. The air was electric with whispers and theories about what surprises Michael might have planned for Chicago. "He always does something special here," an older fan explained to a young girl beside him. "Always something we'll remember forever." Security guards exchanged knowing glances. They'd been briefed about something unusual happening tonight, but even they didn't know the full extent of what was coming. The massive stage, a technological marvel that had taken 4 days to assemble, stood silent and ready, bathed in a soft blue light that revealed nothing of what was to come. Somewhere backstage, final preparations were underway, hushed conversations and last-minute adjustments, a secret about to be unleashed on the unsuspecting crowd. The opening medley had been meticulously choreographed to build tension, jam, wanna be starting something, and human nature flowing into each other like movements of an urban symphony. Michael moved across the stage with inhuman precision, each gesture calculated yet somehow spontaneous, his body becoming the physical manifestation of the music itself. The crowd responded to every move, every glance, every perfectly timed pause. But those who had seen the tour before, who had followed Michael from city to city like pilgrims chasing transcendence, noticed something different in his eyes tonight. A certain anticipation, a barely contained excitement that leaked through his professional demeanor. During Smooth Criminal, he seemed almost impatient, the lean growing sharper, the movements more precise, as if he couldn't wait to reach a specific moment in the set list. The backup dancers sensed it too, feeding off his heightened energy, elevating their own performances to match his intensity. The band, a collection of the world's finest musicians, tightened their groove, the bass and drums locking into a foundation solid enough to support whatever was about to unfold. Even the lighting technicians, following their carefully programmed cues, seemed to understand that tonight's show was building towards something extraordinary, something unplanned in the official production notes, but whispered about in pre-show meetings. Then came Black or White, the anthem of racial harmony that had defined the Dangerous album. Michael stood center stage, the spotlight creating a perfect circle of white light around him. The familiar opening chords washed over the audience, triggering an immediate response. 65,000 voices singing along to the lyrics they'd memorized, 65,000 hearts beating in sync with the message of unity and acceptance. Michael's voice, clear and powerful, carried to the farthest corners of Soldier Field, reaching those in the highest seats with the same intensity as those in the front row. He performed the choreography with practiced precision, but there was a restlessness to his movement, a sense that he was waiting for something. And then, as the song approached the instrumental bridge, Michael stepped to the edge of the stage and raised his hand. The music softened slightly, the backing track receding just enough for his voice to cut through. "Chicago," he said, his voice simultaneously intimate and arena-filling. "I've brought someone special tonight." The crowd's curiosity manifested as a wave of whispers that swept through the stadium. Someone who represents what music is all about, breaking boundaries. Michael's eyes scanned the audience, taking in their confusion, their anticipation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow still reached every ear in the massive venue. "Please welcome my brother in music, the legendary Slash." For a moment, the name hung in the air, incomprehensible to many in the audience. Slash, the wild-haired, cigarette-smoking guitarist from Guns N' Roses? The hard rock icon whose solos had defined a generation of rock music? It seemed impossible, a collision of musical worlds that didn't belong together. But then, emerging from the shadows at the back of the stage, the unmistakable silhouette appeared. The top hat, the wild hair, the Les Paul guitar hanging from his shoulder. A single spotlight captured him, and the crowd erupted in disbelief. Thousands of cameras flashed simultaneously, creating a strobing effect across the stadium. Parents who had brought their children to see Michael Jackson found themselves suddenly screaming alongside them, but for entirely different reasons. The unlikely pairing, the king of pop and rock's guitar hero, stood at opposite ends of the stage, representing two musical worlds that, until this moment, had existed in parallel universes. For 3 heartbeats, they simply acknowledged each other across the distance, Michael with a subtle nod, Slash with a slight tilt of his top hat. Then, as if responding to some inaudible cue, Slash struck the first note of an improvised guitar solo that would redefine what was possible in a live performance. The sound that emerged from Slash's guitar wasn't just music. It was raw emotion translated into audio form. The familiar melody of Black or White transformed beneath his fingers, taking on elements of blues, rock, and something entirely new. Michael stood completely still, head bowed, allowing the spotlight to remain on his guest. The 65,000 people who had come to see Michael Jackson dance were now completely captivated by the stillness of their idol as he honored another artist's moment. This was Michael at his most genuine, a music lover first, a superstar second. The solo built in intensity, Slash moving slowly toward the center of the stage, each step punctuated by increasingly complex phrases on his guitar. The crowd's reaction intensified with each passing second, the applause and screams building into something that resembled a force of nature more than a human response. And then, as Slash reached the center of the stage, standing just feet away from Michael, the guitarist seamlessly transitioned into something unexpected. The opening riff of Beat It. The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming. A collective gasp followed by a roar so loud it seemed to shake the foundations of Soldier Field itself. If this story moves you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more rare and emotional moments from Michael's extraordinary life. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. If you consider yourself a true Michael Jackson fan, share the word unity followed by your favorite MJ and Slash memory. What would you have felt if you were in that Chicago crowd that magical night? Your comments create a community of fans who keep Michael's legacy alive through these shared moments of musical history. Now, let's continue with this extraordinary night that showed how music truly breaks all boundaries. What happened next would be described in thousands of personal accounts, captured on hundreds of amateur videos, and discussed in music circles for decades to come. Michael, who had remained motionless throughout Slash's solo, suddenly came to life as if possessed by the spirit of the music itself. He spun toward Slash, moonwalking in a tight circle around the guitarist, their bodies creating a perfect visual representation of how their musical styles, different yet complementary, could orbit each other in harmonious coexistence. The choreography appeared completely spontaneous, yet perfectly coordinated, as if they had rehearsed for months rather than hours. Michael's dancing became a physical interpretation of Slash's guitar work, each body movement corresponding to a bend of the string or a change in rhythm. The two artists, masters of completely different domains, found a common language on that Chicago stage, the universal vocabulary of passion and authenticity. Backstage, the production crew stood transfixed, their jobs momentarily forgotten as they witnessed something that transcended the carefully planned production they'd been executing night after night. Even Michael's most experienced dancers watched in awe from the wings, understanding they were seeing something unprecedented, a genuine moment of artistic spontaneity within the highly controlled environment of a Michael Jackson concert. A young girl in the third row, who had saved her allowance for months to buy a ticket, stood on her chair, tears streaming down her face as she watched her musical worlds collide. Her mother, initially concerned about bringing a 10-year-old to such a massive event, now found herself equally moved, understanding that her daughter was witnessing something that would shape her relationship with music forever. An older couple who had won tickets through a radio contest and had come out of curiosity rather than fandom stood with their arms around each other. The husband later telling friends, "I wasn't even a fan when I walked in, but I understood greatness when I saw it." Three teenage boys who had snuck into the concert by climbing a fence stood silently at the very back of the stadium, their planned mischief forgotten as they were drawn into the unexpected magic unfolding before them. A security guard, 20 years on the job and convinced he had seen everything a live performance could offer, would later tell his colleagues, "That was the moment music changed for me." Throughout the stadium, strangers turned to each other, exchanging looks of disbelief and joy. Temporary bonds formed through shared witness to something extraordinary. As Beat It reached its climax, Michael executed a series of his most iconic moves: the side slide, the robot, and finally, a perfectly timed spin that ended with him and Slash standing back-to-back at center stage. The crowd's response was physically palpable, a wall of sound that crashed over the stage in waves. Michael, always attuned to the emotional temperature of his audiences, sensed the unique energy in the stadium. He turned to face the crowd, arms outstretched in his signature pose, soaking in their reaction. For nearly 30 seconds, he didn't move, didn't sing, didn't dance. He simply connected with the audience, his eyes scanning the sea of faces, acknowledging the special bond that had formed. Then, breaking character from his usually choreographed performance style, Michael turned to Slash and whispered something that only the guitarist could hear. Whatever was said in that private moment caused the normally stoic Slash to break into a rare smile. Later, when pressed by journalists about what Michael had said, Slash would only respond, "That's between me and Michael, but it was about what music is supposed to do to people." That brief, unscripted exchange, captured by thousands of cameras but understood by only two men, would become one of the most analyzed moments in concert history, a reminder of the humanity that existed behind the larger-than-life personas. What the audience didn't know was that the collaboration had almost never happened. Just 3 hours before the show, Slash had been stuck at O'Hare Airport, his flight delayed by summer thunderstorms. The guitarist, known for his relaxed approach to schedules, had cut it too close, booking a flight that would have given him just enough time to reach the stadium, run through a quick sound check, and take the stage. When the delay was announced, he had immediately called Michael's team, offering to reschedule for another night on the tour. But Michael, understanding the special significance of Chicago and knowing how much the surprise appearance would mean to this particular audience, had sent his private helicopter to the airport. The pilot, fighting through wind and rain, had managed to get Slash to Soldier Field with barely an hour to spare. The hasty preparation had resulted in minimal rehearsal time, just 20 minutes for two perfectionists to coordinate what would become one of the most talked-about musical collaborations of the decade. Perhaps it was this very lack of over-rehearsal, this necessary reliance on pure musicianship and instinct, that made the performance so genuine, so electric. Sometimes, the most perfect moments in art come from the edge of potential disaster, from the electricity of uncertainty that forces artists to be fully present in the moment. As the final notes of Beat It resonated throughout the stadium, Michael made another unplanned decision. Normally, this would be the moment he would thank his guest and continue with the show as programmed. Instead, he turned to his band leader and made a cutting motion across his throat, the universal sign to stop the backing track that had been carefully synchronized with every element of the production. For a moment, confusion spread through the technical crew. This was Michael Jackson, known for his meticulous planning and perfectionism, suddenly going off script in front of 65,000 people. The backing singers exchanged worried glances, the dancers frozen in their positions, unsure what was expected of them. The stadium fell into an unusual quiet, the kind of anticipatory silence that comes when routine is disrupted and something genuine is about to happen. Michael stepped to the front of the stage, Slash still at his side, and spoke without the aid of the pre-planned show narrative. "Music has no boundaries," he said, his voice soft yet carrying across the hushed stadium. "Tonight, Chicago, you're witnessing what happens when we forget the labels and just feel the emotion." He turned to Slash and asked, loud enough for the front rows to hear, "You know human nature?" The guitarist nodded, a look of surprise crossing his face before being replaced with the confident smile of a musician who knew he could handle whatever was thrown at him. What followed was a version of human nature that existed for only those 7 minutes in Chicago, never to be repeated, never to be perfectly captured, even by the professional recording equipment documenting the tour. Slash, known primarily for his hard rock credentials, revealed a sensitivity and musical versatility that surprised even those familiar with his work. His guitar essentially took on the role of a duet partner, responding to Michael's vocals with phrases that seemed to answer the emotional questions posed by the lyrics. The band, consisting of musicians who had performed the song hundreds of times, found themselves rediscovering its emotional core, following the unexpected lead of their guest guitarist. Jennifer Batten, Michael's own legendary guitarist who had played the song on every stop of the tour, stepped back with a smile of appreciation, watching Slash create something entirely new with a song she knew intimately. The backup singers, initially thrown by the deviation from the plan, found their way back into the performance, adding harmonies that complemented the new arrangement. The 65,000 people in attendance collectively held their breath, understanding they were witnessing something that would never be replicated, a genuine moment of artistic creation rather than the reproduction of a rehearsed performance. A middle-aged man in the 14th row, who had brought his teenage son in an attempt to bridge their growing generational gap, found himself gripping his son's shoulder. The boy, who had initially been embarrassed by his father's excitement about the concert, now leaned into his father's side, both of them transfixed by the raw emotion emanating from the stage. "That's why I wanted you to come," the father whispered, and for once his son didn't pull away or roll his eyes. A group of friends who had traveled from Milwaukee specifically for the concert stood with their arms around each other, swaying gently to the reimagined ballad. One of them, a young woman who had been fighting depression and had come to the concert as part of her healing process, later wrote in her journal, "For 7 minutes, everything made sense again." Even the hardened professionals working the event, the security personnel, the technicians, the vendors who had seen countless concerts in Soldier Field, stopped to watch, understanding they were witnessing something beyond the usual spectacle of a superstar performance. This was artistry in its purest form, the kind of genuine musical moment that had become increasingly rare in the era of highly produced megatours. As the improvised version of Human Nature came to its natural conclusion, Michael and Slash stood side by side at the front of the stage, both slightly breathless from the intensity of the unexpected performance. The audience's response was unlike anything the tour had experienced before, not just screaming and applause, but a deep, reverential roar that acknowledged the gift they had just received. Michael, always conscious of his role as an entertainer, allowed the moment to breathe, understanding that sometimes silence can be as powerful as sound. For nearly a minute, he and Slash simply stood there, absorbing the energy flowing from the audience, an unspoken conversation happening between the artists and those who had witnessed their collaboration. Then, in a gesture that would be discussed in music circles for years to come, Slash removed his iconic top hat, something he rarely did during performances, and placed it gently on Michael's head. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. Two musical worlds, often kept separate by artificial boundaries of genre and audience, acknowledging their common ground. The crowd's reaction intensified, understanding they were seeing not just a costume exchange, but a meaningful statement about music's universal language. Michael, visibly moved by the gesture, adjusted the hat slightly and gave a small, humble bow to both Slash and the audience. The hat, Slash's signature accessory and an iconic image in rock music, became something more than a fashion statement in that moment. It transformed into a symbol of musical brotherhood, a physical representation of the barriers being broken on that Chicago stage. For the remainder of Human Nature, Michael performed wearing the borrowed hat, his dancing taking on subtle elements of Slash's stage presence. A bit more swagger, a touch more rock and roll attitude blended with his own unmistakable style. The visual was striking. Michael Jackson, the clean-cut king of pop known for his precision and control, now crowned with this emblem of rock's more rebellious spirit. Photographers in the press pit frantically captured the moment, knowing they were documenting something unprecedented. The image of Michael in Slash's hat would appear on the cover of music magazines worldwide, become the subject of countless fan art creations, and eventually find its way into museum exhibitions about watershed moments in popular music. But beyond its visual impact, the hat exchange represented something deeper, a genuine moment of mutual respect between two artists who had reached the pinnacle of their respective genres and were now finding common ground. What nobody in the audience knew was that Michael had specifically requested the hat gesture during their brief rehearsal. "I want to show them that music is bigger than any one style," he had explained to Slash. "When you put your hat on my head, they'll understand what we're trying to say." It was a calculated moment of spontaneity, planned, but no less meaningful for its planning. Michael, always thinking about the visual and symbolic elements of his performances, understood that this physical exchange would communicate more powerfully than any words could. Slash, though initially hesitant to part with his trademark accessory, even temporarily, had recognized the power of Michael's vision. The guitarist, known for his straightforward rock and roll authenticity, had developed a deep respect for Michael's meticulous approach to performance during their short time working together. "He thinks about every detail, every message," Slash later told a guitar magazine. "I learned more about being a complete artist in one day with Michael than in years of touring." This mutual appreciation between artists from seemingly different worlds created the foundation for the genuine connection the audience witnessed on stage, not a manufactured collaboration for publicity, but a true meeting of artistic minds. As Human Nature ended and the regular set list resumed, the energy in Soldier Field had fundamentally changed. What had begun as a typical, albeit spectacular, stop on a world tour had transformed into something singular, a unique Chicago experience that those present understood would never be replicated exactly the same way again. Michael, sensing this shift, performed the remainder of the concert with renewed intensity, as if Slash's presence had reminded him of the pure joy of musical discovery that had started his journey decades earlier. The perfectly rehearsed movements of the Dangerous tour took on new life, each familiar song seeming somehow fresh and immediate. The audience, having witnessed the unscripted collaboration, remained on a different level of engagement, aware that at any moment, something unexpected might happen again. This heightened attention, this collective presence in the moment rather than the distracted experience that often characterizes large arena shows, created a feedback loop of energy between the performer and the audience. Chicago had always been special to Michael, but this night was cementing a particular bond that would make this stop on the tour legendary among fans. As the concert approached its conclusion, Michael prepared for his traditional finale, the soaring man in the mirror, followed by the spectacle of his departure via crane over the audience. But tonight, there would be one more surprise. As the opening notes of Man in the Mirror began, Michael gestured offstage, and Slash reappeared, this time without his guitar. The crowd, thinking the guitarist had returned merely to take a final bow, roared their approval. But Michael had something else planned. He motioned for a technician, who quickly brought out a second microphone. Slash, looking momentarily uncertain, accepted it with a questioning glance at Michael. "Just feel it," Michael whispered, barely audible even to those in the front row. And then, as the first verse began, Michael Jackson and Slash, the precise vocalist and the guitarist, not known for his singing, delivered a duet version of Man in the Mirror that defied every expectation. Slash's raspy rock voice, untrained but emotionally authentic, provided a gritty counterpoint to Michael's clean, soaring tenor. The contrast was startling, uncomfortable at first, then strangely perfect, like hearing two sides of the same emotional truth expressed simultaneously. The backup singers, once again thrown off their carefully rehearsed parts, quickly adapted, finding harmonies that supported this unexpected vocal pairing. The band tightened around the duet, the drummer pulling back slightly to allow more space for the voices, the keyboardist adding subtle elements that bridged the stylistic gap between the two performers. Even Michael's longtime vocal director seemed impressed, nodding from her position offstage, as these two completely different vocal approaches somehow found common ground in the song's powerful message. Throughout the stadium, people who had seen Michael perform Man in the Mirror before, either live or on television, recognized that something extraordinary was happening. This wasn't just a novelty moment of a rock guitarist singing with a pop star. This was a genuine artistic reinterpretation happening in real time. The song's message about personal responsibility and change taking on new dimensions through this unexpected collaboration. A woman in her 50s who had brought her granddaughter to the concert and had spent most of the show watching the child's reactions rather than the stage, found herself completely engaged by this final surprise. Later, she would tell family members, "I've heard that song 100 times, but I never really heard it until that night." A group of college students who had come mainly to say they'd seen Michael Jackson found themselves having an impromptu group hug during the final chorus. The song's message of personal transformation suddenly resonating with them in a way it never had before. Even the most jaded music critics in attendance, those who had seen everything and were difficult to impress, found themselves moved by the raw honesty of the performance. One would later write, "For 7 minutes in Chicago, all the marketing, all the hype, all the controversy fell away, and we were left with just the music, which is where it all began and where it all should end." As Man in the Mirror reached its emotional peak, the entire stadium joined in the chorus. 65,000 voices united with the unlikely duo on stage. The sound was overwhelming, not just in volume, but in emotional intensity. Security guards reported seeing grown men openly weeping, strangers embracing, and an unusual number of lighters raised throughout the stadium, this being the era before cell phone flashlights. The Chicago police officers stationed outside the venue, used to monitoring the exodus of concert crowds, found themselves drawn to the entrances of the stadium, listening to the unexpected power of what was happening inside. Even the bus drivers waiting to transport fans back downtown after the show stepped out of their vehicles, drawn by the unusual energy emanating from Soldier Field. Something beyond the normal boundaries of a concert was taking place, something that rippled outward, affecting even those who were only peripherally connected to the event. As the song concluded, Michael and Slash embraced center stage, a genuine moment between two artists who had found unexpected common ground. Slash returned the hat to its rightful owner, placing it back on his own head with a theatrical bow to Michael. The crowd's response was deafening, a sustained roar that continued well beyond the normal length of post-song applause. Michael, always attuned to these moments of genuine connection with his audience, stepped to the very edge of the stage, his arms outstretched in his signature pose. For nearly a minute, he stood completely still, accepting the love pouring toward him from every corner of the stadium. Then, breaking from his usual routine, he gestured for Slash to join him. Together, they took a final bow, not as the king of pop and a rock guitarist, but simply as two musicians who had shared something authentic with each other and with the thousands who had witnessed it. As they exited the stage, Michael to prepare for his spectacular over-the-audience departure, Slash to quietly slip back into the shadows. The crowd continued its ovation, understanding intuitively that they had been part of something that transcended the typical concert experience. If you've been moved by this rare glimpse into Michael's genuine artistry and his ability to create unforgettable moments that crossed all musical boundaries, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with others who appreciate these authentic stories that reveal the true heart of Michael Jackson beyond the headlines. The impact of that Chicago night extended far beyond those who were physically present. Within hours, stories began spreading throughout the music world, first through the pre-internet grapevine of phone calls and fan club networks, then through newspaper reviews and music magazine coverage. MTV devoted a special segment to the collaboration, cobbling together fan film footage that, while grainy and imperfect, captured enough of the magic to intrigue those who hadn't been there. Radio DJs across the country discussed the performance on their morning shows, often using it to open conversations about musical boundaries and why they existed in the first place. The major record labels, always attentive to unexpected cultural phenomena, began exploring more cross-genre collaborations, leading to a brief but significant period of musical experimentation in the mainstream. But beyond these industry ripples, the most lasting impact was on the individual level. The thousands of personal stories that emerged from that night, each slightly different but connected by the common thread of witnessing something genuine in an increasingly manufactured musical landscape. For Michael, the Chicago performance marked a turning point in the Dangerous tour. Though the remaining dates would follow the same carefully choreographed production, Slash's appearance had been a one-night special event. Something had shifted in Michael's approach. Those close to him noticed a renewed playfulness in his performances, small moments of improvisation within the structured show, a willingness to occasionally step outside the perfectionism that had defined his career. It was as if the Chicago night had reminded him of something essential about his relationship with music, something that had perhaps become obscured by the massive machinery of superstardom. Slash, too, carried the experience forward, incorporating elements of what he'd learned from Michael into his own performances with Guns N' Roses and later projects. The guitarist became more attentive to the visual aspects of his stage presence, more conscious of the complete artistic package rather than focusing solely on his playing. In interviews, he often cited the Chicago collaboration as a pivotal moment in his development as a performer rather than just a musician. 20 years later, long after both artists had moved through different phases of their careers, Slash was interviewed for a documentary about influential rock guitarists. When asked about his most memorable performances, he immediately mentioned that night in Chicago. "People think it was weird, rock and pop coming together like that," he said, absently adjusting the same top hat he'd worn that night. "But music is just music when you strip away all the marketing categories. What happened that night was just two guys who respected each other, making something real together." He paused, looking momentarily vulnerable beneath the familiar facade of rock star confidence. "I've played with legends all over the world, but that night with Michael in Chicago, that was different. That was pure." The interviewer, sensing something deeper, asked what had made it so special. Slash thought for a moment before answering. "Most of what we do in this business is planned, calculated, rehearsed to death. But sometimes, rarely, you get these perfect moments of genuine connection where the music takes over and everything else falls away. That's what we're all chasing, really, whether we admit it or not. And that's what happened that night in Chicago with Michael. For a few minutes, it wasn't about being famous or selling records or any of that crap. It was just about the music, about creating something honest in the moment." The interviewer nodded, understanding. "That's why people still talk about it," Slash continued. "Not because it was Michael Jackson and Slash. There have been plenty of celebrity collaborations that nobody remembers. They remember Chicago because it was real. And real is pretty rare in this business. Today, in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, visitors can find a small but significant display case containing Slash's top hat, the same one he placed on Michael Jackson's head for those brief, magical moments in Chicago. Beside it sits a single crystal-studded glove that Michael wore that night, donated by his estate specifically to be paired with the hat. The simple placard beside these iconic items reads, "Only Chicago, August 1992, a reminder that music has no boundaries." Each year, thousands of visitors pause at this understated display, many not knowing the full story behind these artifacts, yet sensing their significance. Occasionally, someone who was there that night will stand silently before the case, transported back to Soldier Field in that unexpected moment when two musical worlds collided and, for a brief time, became one. And sometimes, if you watch closely, you'll see them raise their phone to take a picture, only to change their mind and simply stand there, understanding intuitively that some memories are better preserved in the heart than through a lens. Just as some moments in music history can be described but never truly captured except by those who were there to witness them firsthand.